Good evening. Wow, that's easy to quiet this crowd. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Rod Bigelow. I'm Executive Director and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Crystal Bridges. And before we begin, I'd like everyone to take out their phones and silence them. Thank you. I'd like to open this evening with our Indigenous Peoples Acknowledgement, recognizing the museum's role as settlers and guests in the Northwest Arkansas region. We acknowledge the Caddo, Quapaw, and Osage, as well as the many Indigenous caretakers of this land and water. We appreciate the enduring influence of the vibrant, diverse, and contemporary cultures of Indigenous peoples. We are conscious of the role in the colonization that museums have played. As cultural institutions, we have a responsibility to engage in the dismantling of historical and systemic invisibility of Indigenous peoples past, present, and future. We choose to intentionally hold ourselves accountable to appropriate conversation, representation, connection, and education to facilitate a space of measurable change. Thank you. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to the final evening talk of We the People, the Radical Notion of Democracy. Over the past few months, Crystal Bridges has been honored to host an extraordinary lineup of renowned American leaders in concert with this exhibition here. From the acclaimed artists Carrie Mae Weems and Yo-Yo Ma to powerful leaders like former US Secretaries of State Condoleezza Rice and Arkansas's own Hillary Clinton, each speaker has inspired our audience and expanded our understanding of the American experience. If you missed the talks, they're all available online thanks to our wonderful live stream partners, Arkansas PBS. Recordings can be accessed from our own website on the Crystal Bridges YouTube channel or the PBS YouTube channel. We the People places a rare original print of the US Constitution, only 11 known to exist, in conversation with works of art that provide a diverse perspective on the nation's founding principles. Original prints of other founding and historic documents, including the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, the proposed Bill of Rights, and the Emancipation Proclamation are on view alongside works by influential, historic, and contemporary artists. These complex documents encourage visitors to explore the profound influence of Indigenous peoples and societies in the formation of the United States at whole. We the People closes very soon, January 2nd, so tell your friends, bring your family, and experience this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity the exhibition provides. I could not make this introduction without thanking our ardent supporters from the very beginning, our founder, Alice Walton. And our wonderful board chair, Olivia Walton, who couldn't be with us tonight because she literally had a baby last week. But she would love to be here. None of this really would be possible without your vision, Alice. You make art accessible to all. That's what we live for, and that's what we attempt to do every single day. And to our members, I would love for each of you who's a member to raise their hand tonight. Wow. That's incredible. Thank you for helping us bring this insightful programming like tonight's talk. If you're not a member and watching online, you can go online to our website and join today. And in fact, all of you members, I have a challenge for each of you. There's a card on the chair next to you, it's blue, or your partner next to you and it's blue. This encourages you to join, renew, or give a gift of membership. And I challenge each of you to find a friend, a neighbor, a colleague to come join with us. We need you more than ever this year. It's the only way we're able to bring these programs to you like tonight. And if you thought 2022 was a great lineup of speakers, I promise you will not be sad in 2023. Also, I wanted to make sure that we acknowledge the generous supporters who have made tonight, the sponsors that you see on your screens. Let's give them all a round of applause, please. And thank you again for Arkansas PBS partnership. You have made this experience in tonight's program more accessible than we've ever had before. So we're glad to welcome all of you at home. We the People inspires reflection of how the US Constitution and other foundational documents shape our lives and responsibilities today. Crystal Bridges is committed to promoting this kind of dialogue in the context of celebrating the American spirit. I can't think of anyone more suited to discuss this topic than Congresswoman Liz Cheney. Leading our discussion this evening is Caryl M. Stern, Executive Director of the Walton Family Foundation. Caryl is the former president and CEO of UNICEF USA. She's an author, activist, and a global advocate for the health and well-being of children. She has dedicated her career to helping others through education, compassion, and the expansion of civil rights. Since joining the Walton Family Foundation, Caryl has led its work to create the opportunity for people through collaboration and community-led change that ensures high-quality education for children, protects our environment, and builds vibrant, inclusive communities. She has written and spoken extensively on how philanthropy must bridge divides and embrace diverse voices to find common solutions to help people achieve their ambitions. Previously, Caryl served as the Senior Associate National Director and Chief Operating Officer at the Anti-Defamation League. She is a sought-after public speaker. Caryl presented at the White House's inaugural summit on the United State of Women and was named as one of the 25 women changing the world in 2017 by People magazine. I'm honored to welcome my friend, Caryl Stern.
Good evening. I am so excited to see so many family members and friends in the room tonight, and I have, as you heard, the privilege of serving as the Executive Director of the Walton Family Foundation. And I have to admit that up until about 4 years ago, I did not expect that I would become an Arkansan. But I have to also admit that from the moment I met the Walton family, and I had the privilege to come out here and interview, I fought hard to become part of this community. Northwest Arkansas is a values-driven community. We're a community that respects and celebrates diversity. We're a community that stands up for what we believe in. And it's for all those same reasons that I so admire tonight's guest. She is values-driven. She is a woman who acts with conviction. And she is what I would lovingly call a woman who has true grit. Congresswoman Liz Cheney represents the state of Wyoming in the U.S. House of Representatives. In fact, she's the only one who represents the state of Wyoming because they have only one representative. And she is a fierce advocate for her state, which, like ours, is mainly a rural state. She has pursued job creation, lower taxes, greater support for industries like energy and agriculture, but her fiercest advocacy has been for democracy. Congresswoman Cheney served as the chair of the House Republican Conference, the third-ranking Republican in the House of Representatives. Her past professional experience includes time at the State Department as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for the Middle East. She practiced law at White & Case and at the International Finance Corporation. Known for her expertise in national security and foreign policy, she also served as a Fox News analyst and is the co-author, along with her dad, Vice President Dick Cheney, of Exceptional: Why the World Needs a Powerful America. And as if all of that is not enough, she's a working mom. Congressman Cheney and her husband, Phil Perry, have raised 5 children. 5. I thought about that a lot today. Please join me in welcoming our guest, Congresswoman Liz Cheney. So, we've all been watching the news today, and I thought about thought I'd start by just saying, how was your day today, honey? But we all know that today was the final public hearing of the January 6th Select Committee. So I'm sure that this audience is anxious to hear. They want to hear what people should take away from today's meeting, what the committee's report is saying, what the committee as a whole meant. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, and it's wonderful to be here. It's my first time at Crystal Bridges, and I really can't think of anything more fitting at the end of what was a sad day in many ways, but a day that was dedicated to the Constitution, than to be able to be here and to actually see an original copy of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Very, very special. So wonderful to be here, wonderful to be here with the Walton family and with the Bozemans, and thank you for all you do. So it's wonderful to see because I think it can be easy sometimes to think the Constitution isn't relevant for us in our daily lives. And certainly what we've seen over the course of the last year and a half is the extent to which we all have an obligation, not only to ensure that we're doing everything we can to defend the Constitution and defend our institutions, but we have an obligation to educate ourselves. We have an obligation to make sure that as Americans we understand how our institutions work, we understand the protections that the Constitution gives us, and if we don't take the responsibility to educate ourselves, then we won't be able to defend the institutions. And what you saw today was the culmination of 18 months of work by the Select Committee. Our committee is one that I'm very proud of. We operated in almost, I would say, a nonpartisan manner, not just a bipartisan manner, but really focused. The members of our committee have vastly different positions on a whole range of issues, but we agree on the most important issue, which is the defense of the Constitution. And we said from the beginning that we would follow the facts, we would go where the facts lead us. Again, it was with solemnity and sadness that the facts led to criminal referrals for the former President of the United States. But I'm proud of the work that our committee has done. And I think that people ask me, how do we make sure January 6th never happens again? And I think that there are a number of things we need to do, but probably among the very most important, and maybe the most important, is we have to hold those who were responsible for January 6th accountable. There has to be accountability. Yeah.
As we've been talking about, the name of the exhibit here, We the People. But tell us why you personally felt that you needed to take such a powerful step, why you stepped up, why you felt it was important to investigate.
Well, from my perspective, there was never an alternative. When you have a situation where a former president, he was then a sitting president, attempts to stay in power, attempts to prevent the peaceful transfer of power, attempts to overturn an election. When something like that happens, to me, the surprising question is, why doesn't everybody think this has to be investigated? And so really, at each step of the way from impeachment through the establishment of the Select Committee, it has been very clear to me. I mean, if we're a nation where the Congress of the United States will not take steps to investigate an attack on the Congress of the United States that was provoked by and part of a multi-part plan put in place by the then President of the United States, then our constitutional structures won't survive. And so as I said, at every step of the way, I really didn't think of it as a choice because it was clear to me what had to be done.
We all know, though, that your stance may have cost you your seat in Congress. And, you also described the recent midterm elections as a clear victory, though, for Team Normal. And going into the election, all the predictors were saying that the determinant was going to be the economy, it was going to be inflation, and yet people chose to vote for democracy. And I want to read this quote from your remarks at a recent event hosted by the Anti-Defamation League, my former employer, so I pay attention. You said, "I think that you saw in really important races around the country, people coming together to say, we believe in democracy. We believe in standing up for the Constitution and for the Republic." Why do you think people voted for democracy?
The midterms, they really gave me tremendous hope because, as you say, the commentators and the experts all sort of said, democracy is too abstract. It's not an issue that people are going to think about in terms of casting their vote. But what we saw was a rejection of election deniers. And that's just so fundamentally important. If you think about what would have happened in some of these races where you had people running for office, in Arizona, people running for governor and secretary of state and other places around the country who said they would only honor the outcome of elections if they agreed with them. That's unsustainable. That's very dangerous. So I do think that it was important that there was such a clear message, people saying, the extent to which voters did and I think need to continue to demand competence, they need to continue to demand seriousness, they need to continue to demand representatives who will uphold their oath of office. And I think we saw that in the midterms, and we need to continue to see that as we go forward.
So here at the museum, the exhibit features some of our country's founding documents. We have, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and then others that kind of illustrate progress, and they also illustrate some of our challenges, the Bill of Rights, the Emancipation Proclamation. There's a piece that you and I saw together, actually, by Sandel Burke, entitled Monument to the Constitution of the United States. And the artist said, "The Constitution is a living document that affects our everyday lives." So basically, we've been given a playbook. These documents gave us a playbook. So how's the team doing?
I've spent a lot of time, as you have, working around the world in countries that aren't free. And, I worked in Eastern Europe just as the wall came down. I worked in the former Soviet Union, in Kyiv and in Russia, in the early 90s. And when you spend time in countries that aren't free or countries that are trying to achieve and attain their freedom, I think it gives you a particular appreciation for the blessing that we have in the United States. And I think that what I had not realized is that blessing of freedom is fragile. And we have demonstrated again, I think, since January 6th, that our institutions have held. I think the midterms represented a walking back from the abyss. But if there's anybody sort of out there who thinks they don't have a duty and an obligation, no matter, if you're in politics, if you're not in politics, if you're a citizen of this country, you have an obligation and a responsibility to defend our institutions and to understand them. And so I think that's part of a living constitution, what that means. I also was struck, you have an original copy, a couple of them, of the Federalist Papers. And again, I will say, beginning back after the 2020 election, when I was chair of the House Republican Conference, and the discussion was underway about, well, are people going to object to the electoral votes? And my view was absolutely not. Congress does not have the authority to object, except in very narrow circumstances where there's a constitutional infirmity in the electors. The founders did not intend, and the Constitution does not provide, that Congress chooses the president. And I remember I was so struck. There was one moment when we were going through the process of the debate inside the Republicans in the House, and I picked up a copy of the Federalist Papers. And Hamilton talks about how important it will be, for example, that the electors don't meet in one place. The electors meet out, in the individual states, partly because they were worried about political influence and political pressure on electors. And when you think about the thought process and how prescient the founders were in terms of understanding the dangers we would face, the documents speak to us today. And I want to give you one other example I mentioned while we were going through the exhibit. Zoe Lofgren, who's a colleague of mine from California, and I co-sponsored legislation to reform the Electoral Count Act. And we've been in negotiations with the Senate. They have their version, and the House has our version. And at one point, when the negotiations over the last few weeks were, sort of stalled, Zoe and I sent a letter over to our colleagues in the Senate, and one of the questions in the letter was, have you actually read Federalist 68? And we didn't get a response, but I'm hopeful.
I love that. So there's progress. There is. But there's also still a lot of pain in the nation. And we are so divided right now. And what do you think it's going to take for the country to heal?
I think it takes from elected officials responsibility. And I do think certainly one of the lessons that I've learned in the last couple of years has been how important it is to walk away from reflexive partisanship. And this doesn't mean, obviously, that everybody's going to agree on every issue. We have big disagreements, and we should. But the best place for us to be as a country is where we can say, let's have a disagreement, let's debate the issue, and let's assume, that the person on the other side wants to have a substantive debate and discussion, and let's elect people who want to do that. In this last election in the midterms, after, I think I've never actually voted for a Democrat, but I endorsed several, and I campaigned for a number of Democrats in this last cycle, and they included people like Alyssa Slotkin. I endorsed Abigail Spanberger. These are women that I have served with in Congress who, they're both Democrats. I've gotten to know both of them through our work on national security issues. And when I think about the kinds of people our country needs, we need people like that. We need people who are serious and substantive and do their homework. And we ought to start thinking about elections and elected officials and sort of putting the same sort of standards, applying the same sort of standards that we would if we were hiring people for other jobs. But that means we need more candidates. We need more people to run for office, because you have to have the choice of good people who are willing to step up and run so we can demand excellence.
I think you may have kind of answered the question I'm about to ask you just now, but there are generational divides And at the Walton Family Foundation, we are listening a lot to young Americans. You know, we're prioritizing, really listening to Gen Z right now, knowing we're hoping to build their future. And one thing that we're hearing is their desire to reach across the aisle. 80% of them actually responded that they're willing to work with someone they do not agree with. And so we're fighting to redefine collaboration. You know, collaboration historically has been about, you know, finding people who have similar opinions, common ground, and working together. But we've seen that, you know, that doesn't necessarily hold up with the changes in politics. So how can we give this generation role models? They have grown up in a time when they have never experienced an America that isn't divided.
Well, I have 5 children, and so I spend a good amount of time with people in that generation. And look, I will tell you that over the course of the last couple of years, some of my moments of greatest hope have been with young people. And it's partly because of what you're mentioning, that, you know, they don't, it seems to me, think about the world in terms of, you know, I want to be a member of this political party or that political party. And I have had so many experiences, you know, recently where young people have said to me, you know, I might not agree with you on any issue, but I want to fight for the Constitution. I want to live in a country that is characterized by freedom. And I think that making sure that we hold ourselves to that same standard, I think that what not just young people, but frankly what all Americans demand and should demand is that, you know, elected officials treat each other with respect, treat the voters with respect, and that you have enough respect for the voters to actually engage and talk about the issues. But I'm very hopeful about our country when I spend time with the young people in this nation, because I really think that there's a commitment there and a dedication. And look, you saw it in the midterms again, where young people turned out to vote in numbers that you don't normally see. And I think that's fundamentally important.
But you've also talked about the decline in civic literacy. You know, I think you called something, perhaps we needed Constitution boot camps for elected officials, newly elected officials. Do you have any thoughts on what we can do before they get in office? You know, how we might infuse civics education back into the classroom?
You know, it's so important. I think that part of what's happened in education, and I say this as a mom, is people look at the flaws in our country, at the tragedies of our history, and too often have said, you know, well, that's a reason to turn away from the founding documents. And I think it's just the opposite. And I think that we need to make sure people understand that we are not a perfect nation, but the only way that we make progress towards becoming a more perfect union is through the foundational documents of the Republic, recognizing and understanding the freedoms that the Constitution protects and guarantees to us. You know, one of the most important things that I think we need to understand and that we need to educate ourselves about is what does the rule of law mean? And we've seen this play out, certainly. You know, the rule of law means that we are bound by the rulings of the courts, and we can disagree with them. We can say we think the court got it wrong, but we can't ignore them. And this is, I think, you know, when you have a president, for example, who set aside, was willing to ignore, was willing to do everything in his power to attempt to overturn an election despite the rulings of the courts, you begin to understand how dangerous that is. But I think that requires that we ensure that our young people really do understand. And understand doesn't mean being naive about this nation, being naive about our founding, but it requires that we are able to say, even though we are not a perfect nation, we are the most perfect nation that's ever existed, and that we teach our children that.
So growing up in the home of the vice president, do you think you were destined? I mean, were these the conversations at the dinner table?
The conversations were more like, okay, now, how are we going to deal with the dent in the car that you just, put in? What are we? I was not a very good driver when I was young, so. We had the normal conversations, but we also had, because both of my parents are really students of American history, and I took a picture of the Washington portrait that hung in Hamilton's home, so I can show my mom. My parents are watching on live stream if they got the tech figured out this evening. So, but the benefit and the blessing of having parents who love this nation and who studied our history was very special. And so, we certainly would talk politics, but we also, my parents made sure that, we spent time understanding our history. My dad would take my sister and me to visit Civil War battlefields, and we groaned about it a lot at the time, but both of us, have taken our own children to do that now. So I think that was one of the most important lessons of growing up and understanding, the importance of American history.
Tell me a little bit about the book and what it was like to write a book with your dad.
Well, it was very special. We've written actually two books together, and then I helped him on a third one, but I helped him on his memoirs. And that was very special because it's not often that as an adult you have the chance to sit with a parent and talk about their lives. And I learned stories about my dad I had never known before. He told me when we were working on his memoirs about the experience he had when he was a young man at the University of Wyoming, and he had gone to Yale for a while and didn't do so well, and dropped out and then dropped out again. It was a long story, but ended up at the University of Wyoming, and it was September of 1963, and President John F. Kennedy came to speak at Laramie. And my dad told me the story of what it felt like for him to be there in the field house at Laramie and to hear John F. Kennedy talk and to hear President Kennedy talk about public service and service to our nation, and watching President Kennedy's motorcade pull away. And of course, he was killed just a couple of months later. But after my dad told me that story, which I had not heard before, I went home and I Googled the speech, and you can listen to an audio of it. And it was a very special thing to be able to hear President Kennedy at the speech that had meant so much to my dad. I told this story at an event a couple of months ago, and Steny Hoyer was there, the Democratic leader. And Steny came over to me and he said, I had exactly the same experience. I was a student at the University of Maryland, and President Kennedy came to speak, and exactly the same motivation for public service. But the opportunity to really work with my dad and help him write his memoirs and then write the book that we did about foreign policy was a very, very special time.
And who knows, there may be someone in the audience tonight who will be saying that about you. So in my day, when we wanted to make change, we got together with people with whom we had common ground and people who thought like us. We made signs, we held rallies, we marched sometimes. And as I said earlier, we know that today, change that only accounts for one perspective can't stand up when the winds of politics change. So at the foundation, we're spending a lot of time redefining collaboration. Instead of just working with like-minded people, and instead of always looking for common ground, we want a diverse table. We want to work with people we don't necessarily agree with, and instead of common ground, we want to work for common solutions. We don't have to agree. Do you think it's possible with the current status to bring people together to do that?
I do. I mean, I think certainly the nation is very divided. I think there are a whole range of reasons why, including the effect of social media, which I'm not sure anybody knows the answer to, but certainly does not encourage civility, and I think adds to the divide. But I think that one of the most important things for people to understand, and I saw this when I was working in the Middle East, and I think history is clearly, if you study history and you study what has caused change over the years, not just in the United States, but around the world, you almost always, and I think probably you could say without exception, you find people who care deeply about the causes in which they're working and are willing to dedicate time and energy to try to accomplish their goals. And I think that is what's one of the most important lessons for young people to hear today, that you can make a difference. It's not just a platitude, but at the same time, that means you have an obligation to make a difference. And you have to recognize what an unusual thing it is. In most places around the world, in most times in history, people have not been free. They've not been free to choose who leads them. They've not been free to fight for the causes in which they believe. They've, as is true in many countries around the world today, you face death or imprisonment for standing up for your beliefs. And I think that as Americans, we have an obligation to understand what a unique and special blessing it is that we can make decisions about our future and our destiny and our rights and the causes that we want to fight for. And people, young people especially, need to know that the way to do that is to be engaged and engaged and active and educated. Educate yourself. Know that if you're going to go out and advocate on behalf of a principle or a candidate or a belief, that you have a responsibility to educate yourself so that you can advocate for those goals, those things in which you believe.
I want to switch gears for 1 minute because you've referenced, what you've learned from young people, and I ended your introduction by mentioning your 5 children. So how did you balance? What's your work-life balance? What's it
There's
like?
no balance.
There is no balance. But we've got a lot of working parents in the audience. What is your...
Yeah, I mean, well, my children now, our youngest is a sophomore in high school. So throughout the 27 now years of being a mom, 28, sorry, my oldest daughter is probably watching thinking, don't you know how old I am, Mom? So, sorry. But, I've done sort of all sorts of, I've been a stay-at-home mom sometimes, I've worked part-time, sometimes I've worked full-time sometimes, and, I don't think that you ever probably as a mom feel like, oh, I've got it, this is like perfect balance is working out right now. But kids give you perspective, and, my youngest son, after one of the hearings on the select committee last summer, I came home and, it had been a lot of news coverage about it, and he met me at the door and he said, Mom, I'm so proud of you, and it's wonderful that the hearings are done, and can we please now focus on my learner's permit, because I really need to get a learner's permit. Okay.
Boy, I know that feeling.
Exactly. But I think, and I know I saw this as a child, that it is important for children to see their parents engaged in causes bigger than themselves. And, I had a moment in the immediate aftermath of January 6th where I was sitting at dinner with my husband and our 2 sons, who are our youngest, and I looked at my boys across the table, and I had this realization of having grown up in a country where we all take for granted that we're going to have a peaceful transfer of power. It just never occurred in the United States, certainly since the Civil War, that we wouldn't have a peaceful transfer of power. And I looked at my sons and I thought, are they going to be a generation that cannot say that? Mm-hmm. And my commitment to making sure that my kids do grow up in a country where they know the peaceful transfer of power and they know that it's guaranteed is certainly made even more complete as a mom, and making that commitment to them.
So, looking ahead to next year, what's on the horizon?
I don't know. I do think it's really important, and the issues that we've been talking about here tonight, I want to continue to be involved in issues that have to do with our Constitution and education and young people. And, you know, this country has so much potential, and our citizens, when you look at what happened in the midterms and you look at how, you know, at the end of the day, people fundamentally, you know, rejected crazy. And and I think that making sure that people have good candidates, making sure that people get in and run for office, and doing everything I can, you know, really to help continue to make sure that people understand and love American history and learn from it. You know, you realize that we are not that many generations away from, you know, from the Civil War, from the founders. There's a new book. I'm going to give John Meacham a book plug here. He has a new Lincoln biography out. And Meacham does a wonderful thing in his book where he takes you on the walk that Lincoln took every morning from the boarding house where he lived at the Library of Congress up the steps of the Capitol and into Statuary Hall, where the House met when Lincoln was a member of the House. But, you know, you realize, Meacham talks about Lincoln having been in the House chamber when John Quincy Adams was also a member of the House, and Lincoln was in the chamber when John Quincy Adams collapsed and then died a few days later. And you realize how young we are as a nation. You realize there aren't that many generations that separate us from those great figures of history. But also when you think about how young we are as a nation, but we're the world's oldest democracy.
Right.
And that is a really important thing to remember and understand when you're thinking about the incredible blessing we have and how easy it could be to lose it.
You know, the end of the exhibit downstairs really kind of brings us up to today. If you've not been to the exhibit yet, I so encourage everyone. It is phenomenal. And Patrick Martinez has these big neon lights and really talks about America is for the dreamers. And, you know, the exhibit ends on a note of hope. Yeah. What gives you hope?
Well, I think America gives me hope. And as complicated and as intense and as difficult as our political battles sometimes are, you know, at the end of the day, you know, we have throughout history come together and moved forward, and that gives me hope. You know, I think when you think about the issues and the challenges that we're dealing with, and you think about the fact that, you know, this is a nation where people want to come, people want to be in the United States. You think about, you know, what does that mean? You know, I am a firm believer we have to secure our borders, but we also have to be sure that we understand and recognize why people want to be here, and the blessing and the opportunity that this country provides is unmatched, and that's something that we should be really proud of and really humble about, and I, you know, fundamentally, America gives me hope. And I think that you know, you cannot be Pollyannish about it, certainly when you've been through what we've been through. I had absolutely hoped for more from my fellow Republicans when, you know, the chips were down, and so many acted in a political way. But I think that as a nation, we've come through very difficult times before, much more difficult times before. And I think that when you look to the future, we have tremendous potential. And that requires, though, that we're really willing to do what's required by our oath, willing to work together in a civil way, and come to solutions that will help lead us all to the future.
So before I wrap us up, is there any other comment you want to make on the process, or today or tomorrow?
Well, I have a lot to say.
I'll sit back.
You know, I think that what we have seen and what we've lived through, and what we need to continue to stand against, is a turning away from, a violation of, a rejection of our fundamental constitutional protections. And, you know, I think one way that it's really important for us to think about it is, if we only defend the Constitution when it serves our political purposes, then we won't ever be able to call on it as a shield when we need it. It is a shield for us. If you want to be able to to live in a republic where the Constitution, where you can count on it as a shield, as a protection of our First Amendment rights, of our Second Amendment rights, of you know, all of the rights in the Constitution, then you have to be willing to stand up for it, even when it's not politically, especially when it's not politically beneficial. And I really, I think that when you look at what we've been through, you look at how quickly a very complicated and sophisticated, in many ways, plot was formed to use many different efforts to try to overturn an election. We all have to be vigilant. You know, we all, I think, on some level get complacent, and you think, well, that can't happen in the United States, but it can. It did. Our Capitol was attacked. It was attacked by citizens, and it was attacked by people, frankly, who Donald Trump preyed on their patriotism. In so many ways, he preyed on people's patriotism, and he turned it into a weapon. And he told people, if you love your country, you've got to fight, and you have to take back the country. And it was a lie, and it continues to be a lie. And we all, every one of us, have to reject that and say, we do not accept that. We reject the lies. We're going to hold people accountable, and we're going to work together to make sure we defend the Constitution going forward.
So, you know, in the spirit of the holiday season that we're in, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, but I especially want to thank you, Congresswoman Cheney, not only for showing up tonight, but for showing up consistently. I mean, you know, to come straight from the hearings, to come here, to share your views. I think for all of us, you're showing up for democracy. I think as we all go through this exhibit, you will be the face that's on our mind. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Wonderful to meet you. Thank you.